Previous videos have focused on communicating the need for differentiated instruction, managing it, identifying your objectives, and assessing student needs. Once you've identified and created your learning objectives, that is, what you want your students to know, understand, and be able to do, and you've assessed your students' grasp of those objectives, either formally or informally, you need to decide whether you want to differentiate your instruction based on readiness, learning profile, or interest, or some combination of those. It's important to match an instructional strategy to your basis for differentiating. Ask yourself, is this the best, most effective strategy for me to use to accomplish my goals? For instance, independent project options are a great way to address learning profile or interest differences. And learning contracts and centers can be used to address readiness, learning profile, or interest, depending on how a teacher designs them. But format focuses primarily on learning profile. There are many different strategies that teachers can use as they differentiate instruction. The trick is to choose ones you're comfortable with and to make sure that you're choosing the right ones for the job. And while no teacher will ever be able to use, or for that matter need to use, all available strategies, there are a few that I would say are non-negotiables in a differentiated classroom. Tiering is one of those. The great thing about tiering is that you can apply it to just about anything you can imagine using in your classroom. Certainly classroom activities can be tiered. Resources and materials can be tiered. Homework assignments, center activities, projects, and independent studies can all be tiered. Even items on tests can be tiered. Really, anything can be tiered. So let's say you're a first grade teacher and it's time to teach compound words. You've had these students for a few months, and it's clear to you, as anyone who has ever taught first grade will understand, that where reading and writing are concerned, your students' readiness levels are all over the map. You're clear about your objectives. Students will be able to identify and spell compound words. You could teach these in the same way to all of your students, but chances are that approach won't be terribly effective. Your previous observations of their work and their skills in language arts tells you that some differentiation is needed. Some of your students may already be familiar with compound words. Others may pick up on them more quickly than you might predict, while still others may not really be ready for them until much later in the school year. So having all of your students work in the same way is not an option. Knowing this, you begin with an open-ended discussion about compound words. Perhaps you put some examples of compound words on the board and see what your students have to say about them. This, along with your previous observations of your students' work, serves as your pre-assessment. It's informal, but it gives you an idea of what your students already know about compound words, and it lets you know who might be able to pick up on them pretty quickly. This discussion is also instructional, so you're really killing two birds with one stone. To follow up the discussion, maybe the next day, students work on independent work that is tiered for two different readiness levels. So some students are simply putting simple words together, for example ball and foot, to create compound words that you may or may not have discussed with the whole group, while other students are creating unknown compound words from groups of words provided and are filling in blanks in sentences using their new words. You're asking the second group of students to work with unknown words, and they're going a bit further by then putting those words into sentences. Certainly these students could do the first task, but it might not challenge them. Likewise, the second task might be too much of a challenge for students completing the first task. And of course, as with all student work, what the students do with their independent assignments should inform what they work on next. Thus, these assignments also function as assessments. At this point, you decide you'd like for all your students to complete some larger products using compound words. Using your assessment information from the group discussion and the students' independent work, you know that they shouldn't be asked to create the same types of products. So you again come up with two tiers for these products. It's possible that your student groupings haven't changed from earlier, but it's just as possible that you've had to adjust your groupings, that some students surprised you with their ability or their inability to successfully complete their independent work with compound words. You decide that once you've given the students their assignments, you'll let them choose whether they'll work independently or in pairs. This is a great way to address learning profile. Students working at the lower level with regard to compound words create picture dictionaries of compound words. They'll write and illustrate one compound word on each page. Students in the other group Those who have demonstrated a more advanced grasp of compound words will create stories, poems, or songs using as many of them as they can. Are both groups meeting the objectives? That is, are both groups identifying and spelling compound words? Yes. Do the tiers offer challenge at different readiness levels? If your assessments have been accurate, and if you've used them to design your students' tasks, then the answer should be yes again.
Okay, and so he did, oh, his has a nice sunset or sunrise on there. And so illumination with a P. Very nice. Okay, did you do one?
Yeah. It's add some, and it means like I am present for role taking.
Okay. Are you here? Yes, I am. Good. A. You did illumination on all the letters. That's nice. Okay, and it's yours.
Mine says age quote ages, which means always pay attention to what you're doing.
Okay, very nice. And the A has flowers.
One final consideration, an important part of a differentiated classroom, any classroom really, is the sense that students have that they're part of a community of learners. It's difficult to foster that sense of community when students are often working on different tasks without sharing what they've produced or come to understand. So an important step in tiering assignments is whole group closure. With the compound word example, students need time to share their products with one another. This can be done with the whole class or in small mixed readiness groups. Either way, students need to know that what they've learned and created are important and worth talking about. In order for tiered assignments to work, it's important to keep some things in mind. First, they are used to address readiness or ability differences. Some strategies are great for dealing with learning profile and interest differences. Tiering is not one of them. For this reason, when tiering, teachers should assign students to the tasks they need to complete. If we were to let students choose which tiered task to complete, a great many of them would probably choose what they saw as the easy one and bypass a task that might be more appropriately challenging for them. In a differentiated classroom, we should certainly offer chances for students to make their own choices. However, tiered assignments aren't the time to do that. Another important quality of tiered assignments is that they are focused on the same objective. This means that some students may be working with the objective in a concrete or more simple way, while others are working with it on a more abstract level or in a more open-ended way. Finally, it's important to provide closure activities or discussions when tiering. This allows students to share their work and learn from one another, and it helps build community in a differentiated classroom. When people hear about differentiated instruction, they often equate it with tiered assignments. That is, they think that differentiation really is just this one strategy. Likewise, people tend to think that tiering sounds like ability grouping or tracking, that students will come to associate themselves with a particular group of students or begin to see themselves as dumb or as smart. Certainly students label themselves and those around them, but I think it's important to keep in mind that student readiness changes from subject to subject and from topic to topic within a given subject area. So while I may be working in what appears to be a lower group when we're studying compound words, when we get to math, I may be working in an entirely different group because the skills required are totally different. It's important for teachers to make sure that groups are changing enough so that students have opportunities to work with different people and with different types of tasks. Another thing to keep in mind is that when we talk about groups doing different tasks, we don't always mean that students are working together in small groups. Often we mean that a group of students is doing the same task, but students are working on it independently. Your task before your next discussion is to evaluate tiered assignments using the criteria for effective tiering. That is, the assignment should be differentiated based on readiness, not learning profile or interest, and therefore they should challenge students working at different levels. The tiered assignment should certainly focus on the same objective or objectives, ensuring that students learn what is intended. And finally, there should be some closure to the assignments so that students come to see that what they've done is something worth doing. Make sure to evaluate at least 3 tiered assignments so you get a good range of them. There are many examples of tiered assignments both in books and on the internet, so finding them should not be too difficult. The idea here is for you to get a good feel about what can be tiered and how it looks before you begin creating your own tiered assignments.